everyone, so today I'm going to be doing my full review on the Nubian 2 palette. Yesterday was, or actually the day before, was the last day of my one palette 1 week, and this is the review to finish off that week. I've done 5 tutorials using this palette in a whole wide range of different looks, so I will leave the playlist linked at the end of this video and you can definitely check those out if you're interested and want some inspiration, or you don't even have to use this palette, it's just really cool to see some inspiration for some eyeshadow looks anyway. So I did want to talk about this palette today because that is why we're here. But let's start with the packaging. So firstly, the Nubian 2 is by Juvia's Place, which is an online, I think, only company at this stage. They are in the States. The palette itself comes in this cardboard packaging with this magnetic closure, which is really nice. It feels sturdy, it feels like there's some weight to it. There's no mirror, it's just some beautiful African artwork. I really like the colour scheme, how they have that detailing of that hot pink along the edges. This kind of like mustardy orangey yellow is a colour that I'm very fond of, and I think it correlates really nicely to the shades inside. The palette on the inside is really beautiful. As you can see the shades there, I think it's quite appealing to the eye, although there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of like rhyme or rhythm as to how the shadows are placed out. They're kind of just thrown in there. In terms of the actual colours, I feel like they go together pretty nicely. They are definitely more of like an autumnal type of color range without going too red, and definitely going more on the like jewel tones and the mustard tones. All of the names and shades are inspired by African culture. The names here like Cleopatra, Sheba, Madagascar, Morocco, some of them are more specific to Egyptian culture and some of them are just for African culture as far as I'm aware. I wanted to show you quickly the size of these pans. They are huge. If I could compare it here, this is a Makeup Geek pan. Juvia's Place pans are quite a lot larger. The Makeup Geek pan is 1.8 grams of product, whereas each pan in this Juvia's Place palette is 3.5 grams of palette of product. So you are getting heaps of product in this palette. This palette is currently listed on the Juvia's Place website for $35. Although I'm pretty sure nearly always they have a special on, and I got mine for $24, I'm pretty sure, or $28 maybe, I think, when I bought it, and I bought the Masquerade palette at the same time. Now we're going to be talking about the quality of the shadows, which I think is probably the reason that you're here. So in the swatches, I actually found that the mattes swatched the worst out of all of the shadows. The mattes looked really chunky in the swatches, although I have to say when using them on my eyes, the mattes are probably my favourite things out of this palette, which is a little bit strange because I feel like Juvia's Place is known for their shimmer shadows, and shimmer shadows are typically easier to get correct. So when a palette has a mixture of shimmer and mattes, typically the shimmers are going to be more popular, but I actually preferred the way that the mattes performed. On the eyes, they seem to have quite a lot of pigmentation and blend out quite easily. They weren't difficult to work with. They didn't also kick up a lot of product, which I find is important for some people. The shimmers kind of vary in terms of how shimmery they are and in fact how much I like them. As I'm speaking, I'll have like a picture of the palette and I'll like ding 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 with stars as to which ones I'm speaking about at that moment. Some of the shimmers here are definitely softer to the touch. They feel a little bit more powdery and a little bit more smooth, and when you take them out of the pan, they're more pigmented when you swatch them, and when you apply them to the eyes, I find that they are a bit more easy to work with. They seem to adhere to the lid a little bit better. Some of the shimmers here aren't quite as metallic, and there are a couple of shimmers in this palette that are definitely more dense. They have the same feeling to me as the Makeup Geek foiled shadows, these particular shimmers. These shimmer shades didn't have the same quality, they just had the same feel in the pan. The quality of these shimmer shades I found to be a little bit harder to work with. The pigmentation wasn't as punchy as the other shades. I also found that once you applied them to the lid and tried to blend the edges or whatever, the colour would just blend away. So that was a real negative for me. And I found during my review, I had some days where I really liked my makeup and how the eyeshadow was turning out, and other days where everything just seemed to be going wrong and like nothing was adhering to my lid. and I think maybe if I had wet my brush with Fix Plus it would have worked a little bit better. But what I like to do with this series is to make sure that I'm using as little extra products as possible so that you can get this palette knowing that you can make it work for you without having to bring in all of these extra things. So that's typically what I try to do. Sometimes I'll add in like an eyeliner, whether it's a pencil or a liquid, but for the most part I try to not alter the way that the shadows apply too much. I feel like for 12 shades, $35 US is pretty reasonable. It is kind of deemed as an affordable makeup brand. I wouldn't say that it's a huge steal, but I would say for the amount of products that you get and the variety of colours that you get, it is deemed affordable. Would I recommend this palette? It's completely up to you in how you like to use your eyeshadows and what sort of eyeshadow looks you typically tend to do. If you like to have like a palette for everyday wear and you put a lot of matte shades into the crease and outer third and just pack a shimmery shade on the lid, I think this palette could work really well. I found that it actually worked really well when I did really simple looks. When I started to kind of experiment a little bit more and do different shades here and different shades there and kind of blend them together, that's when they kind of started to get a little bit muddy and started to not work as well, and therefore made me not like them as much. I am typically like a pretty experimental person with my eyeshadows and with the shades and colour combinations and stuff that I like to do. But if you're not, this palette could be really good for you. The other thing to keep in mind is because these pans are so big, if this palette was going to be one that you were going to reach for every day, you would not go through a pan of product. I highly doubt anyway. The pans are so large that you're going to get a lot of use out of them. If you are as fair as I am, you might struggle with having no lighter transition shade and no bone color matte shade in the palette. But this palette was designed for people of color, and I feel like if you did have a deeper skin tone, you will love this product because it is very pigmented. I know that this review seems a little bit inconclusive and it kind of is left up to your discretion. What sort of things do you look for in an eyeshadow palette? I also wanted to mention that these palettes are constructed in the USA, but the actual powders and shadows themselves are made in China. So if that's something that you're worried about, please keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that when I first started using these, they did irritate my eyes, and a couple of times if I get any of the eyeshadow fallout, which isn't very often, these don't tend to have a lot of fallout, but if I got any in my eye was really itchy all day and it was quite irritated. So I did look on the Juvia's Place website, and the top two ingredients on this palette are talc and mineral oil, both of which are quite irritating to people's eyes. So keep that in mind if you tend to be irritated by talc or mineral oil. So it just kind of depends on what you like in an eyeshadow palette. I wouldn't necessarily run out and buy it again. I think that knowing what I know now, I would probably pass on it just because I have trusty faithfuls that I know that I absolutely love, and I could get a couple of shades of, you know, the dark blue and the dark green and stuff and a Makeup Geek foiled shadow, which I know that I use all the time, and I could just add that to my collection and kind of mitigate having this whole palette. But if you are looking for like an everyday palette, you really like these colors and you're not particularly irritated by talc or mineral oil, you don't mind that the shadows are made in China, I think that this palette is actually a really good buy. I don't think that you could go wrong with it. It just depends on what you like and what your preferences are when it comes to shadow. You could completely love this, and I've seen reviews where people are dying over this palette. They love it so much. So it's just totally personal preference, and I don't think that this palette is absolutely terrible or absolutely the best thing ever. I think it's kind of somewhere in between, and that's kind of left up to your discretion. I personally am not. I kind of felt like, with this palette. So I hope that that cleared up a couple of questions for you. It probably raised more questions than answers, but I hope that that was at least a little bit interesting and you have enjoyed the past week, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Thanks for watching my video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!